right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to the first Patch Tuesday of 2023. We have a few updates beyond Microsoft today to talk about. It was looking like it was going to be a Microsoft-only day yesterday, but then Adobe and Google came out shortly after the noon hour Central Time, so just after Microsoft released their updates with Acrobat Reader, Chrome, and a few other updates. So it turned out to be a little bit bigger than what we were originally seeing as of yesterday morning, but overall, not a huge update, but there's definitely a lot to go through. Some of the biggest things that came up this month that we're going to talk about are some of the lifecycle events that are happening as of yesterday. So we're going to go through, talk about the Adobe Acrobat and Reader. They did have a couple of other applications that had updates as well yesterday, but they were all, for some of the more, specific kind of smaller groups that, use things like, I'm not even remembering which ones they updated yesterday. But Adobe Acrobat and Reader was kind of the core one for Adobe. Google Chrome did release an update that resolved several vulnerabilities, and then Microsoft had many vulnerabilities resolved in yesterday's release, 98 total new CVEs resolved, and 3 of them that were re-releases that really most of it was updating that there were either new versions affected, so Server 2022 as an example, or a couple of cases where configuration came into play, additional configuration steps. So we'll talk about a number of the updates there. First off, though, starting with some of the recent news. The first one that I wanted to touch on actually isn't on this slide, but all started happening as of this morning. There was, many of you may have seen news about this already, with the FAA being impacted by a computer outage and flights being grounded across the U.S. As of the latest articles I was reading of, as of 15 minutes ago, there was no indication that it was cybersecurity related. So, we'll keep an eye on it, but it doesn't look like it was a cybersecurity attack as far as what the DOT updated the president on as of this morning. So that'll be an interesting one to keep an eye on to see what ultimately occurred there, but they're not sure of the root cause yet. The first attack or, cybersecurity bit of news that I wanted to go through, though, was around a ransomware attack that occurred recently. This was the Play ransomware attack on Rackspace's hosted exchange services. So this is one where I don't want to go too much into the Rackspace specific incident. I want to focus more on, some of the side topics of this. So the mitigations that were put in place, I wanted to clarify a couple of things there. There was a little bit of kind of confusion around what exactly was exploited, and it almost implicated that the mitigations were supposed to protect against this but didn't. That's not exactly the case, and CrowdStrike's article that we'll pull up here in a second kind of goes through that. So that's where we'll start today. I'm going to share my screen. Those of you who have been on our events before, you're familiar with the ON24 platform. For those of you who may not have, you will see that a second shared window just popped up in your experience there in the browser. You can minimize the slides for a moment here. We're going to focus more on the browser share that I just brought up here. But basically, the news that came out around this, Rackspace has a hosted exchange service that they serve many customers with. And when the November Exchange update came out last year, they tested and found that there were performance issues with that patch, so they didn't put the patch in place. They kept running with the mitigations that were provided by Microsoft prior to the patch being released. The attacker was able to bypass those mitigations and be able to actually go and exploit the vulnerability that the patch fixed, and from there was able to gain access to, and they did encrypt upwards of 27 of Rackspace's customers' Exchange environments before the attack was basically shut down by shutting down access to that Exchange environment. So all of those customers were then disrupted by that. A couple of things that I wanted to make sure to point out in here. The patch, there's actually 3 CVEs in total that were being discussed in here, and they were resolved in the November update. So here's in the links here, the November exchange update talks about, the exchange update that occurred, the different branches and everything like that. But down in the FAQ, it talked about the CVEs involved. The attack that had occurred, the proxy not shell attack, was a combination of chaining CVE 2022-41040 and CVE 2022-41082. That was the attack combination that was used originally, and what the mitigation was focused on was targeting, preventing the methods that were used to target 41040. In this new attack, the Play ransomware attack that occurred against Rackspace, they actually targeted the other CVE that was resolved, which was 41080. So that's where this kind of shifts over to the risk that was bypassed in this case was that additional vulnerability. So Microsoft, when they released the Exchange update on November 8th, they specifically provided guidance saying the mitigations are no longer recommended. And even before that, I mean, the mitigations were originally kind of coming out here over the course of several weeks, a couple weeks here. They had to be re-released several times. So the mitigations were really having a hard time kind of meeting the overall needs of, mitigating that vulnerability. Sorry, I'll try to increase the font size there a little bit. If you haven't already, you can actually grab the PDF version of the presentation, and you'll have access to all of those links that I've provided here in the presentation there as well. But I know it's hard to read that sometimes, changing resolutions between screens. So Microsoft's guidance at this point was stop using the mitigations, put the patch in place. So that was kind of where they had kind of left that. The comments from Rackspace were more about Microsoft not clearly saying there was an attack chain between 41080 and 41082. So that's where the confusion starts to set in here. These mitigations were not intended for the new way that the Play ransomware attack bypassed the mitigations, because they actually went after a completely different vulnerability. So if you go to CrowdStrike's write-up, in that write-up, there's a graphic down here that kind of represents this most clearly. If you want to read through the whole thing, they're very thorough in this. In fact, our CISO knows one of the main researchers that was a part of this, and they talked about it at length. So their thoroughness was quite good in this article. But if you look at this, the original attack for proxy not shell, the exploit took advantage of 41040 and then exploited the 41082 to get remote code execution. So privilege escalation, remote code execution. It's an attack chain that allowed the attacker to do that. The mitigations were in place to try to stop the method of exploiting 41040. The new attack that Play ransomware executed was using methods to exploit 41080. So this, at the time of the patch in November, was not confirmed to be actively exploited. What the findings found there, and you can actually go back to the Microsoft article and see that this was not confirmed to be disclosed or exploited at that point. But they did actually, in the course of researching 41040 and 41082, they did discover this vulnerability as well and get it resolved. And there was the reference back to the researchers that had helped to identify these vulnerabilities. But the mitigations weren't covering an exploit method against 41080. So this is where kind of things got really difficult. The mitigation was not intended to prevent 41080. So, is Microsoft going to come back and do mitigations for 41080 as well? I have no idea if they would, because they've got a patch in place that CrowdStrike confirmed would have still blocked even the new attack chain using 41080 and 41082. If they would have put that patch in place, all three vulnerabilities would have been protected against. So Microsoft has a full fix in place, and really that comes down to kind of the crux of the issue. Once a fix is in place, continuing to rely on mitigations is risky. And that's the risk that Rackspace took in this case. But the point that I wanted to kind of touch on here is putting faith in a mitigation after a official fix is in place is not ideal, because it has no guarantee that some new way around that mitigation could be executed. If you read the blog post that we posted yesterday, I went in to kind of talk about a few different things. Mitigations are meant to be short-term kind of, again, it's a mitigation. It's a short-term fix, not intended to fully resolve the issue, but to reduce the risk. That can really range quite a bit. If we just take a few examples, in this case, the mitigation was for one specific vulnerability. It didn't cover another variation of attack chaining that could go around it. If you look at an example like Log4j, that mitigation could still be protecting you today, depending on which vendor and how their guidance worked. But usually in most cases, it was removing the binary that included the vulnerability. But with that, you also removed certain logging features from that experience. So it's a trade-off. I remove the vulnerability from the equation along with some functionality. If we look at a mitigation like Print Nightmare's initial mitigation was turn off the print service, the print spooler. So in that case, you're actually sacrificing all print services as the trade-off. So mitigations are never intended to be a long-term fix. And I think that's where this one, ultimately kind of went awry. The other thing that I spoke about in that blog post, and actually Todd and I saw a post on patchmanagement.org that is asking a direct question about that I'll be responding to later this morning. Overall, the continued use of a technology has kind of long-term risks. If that technology gets to the point where it can no longer keep up with the modern kind of use cases that you need to apply it to. So this is where Microsoft created Outlook 365. So the Office 365 suite was intended to handle more modern day kind of challenges around managing mail services for an organization. Exchange originally was not intended to manage, as many types of scenarios as we're demanding of it now, in kind of modern experiences that we need. So a technology like that, there's been many write-ups about the highly privileged services and complexity within Exchange. The type of admin and effort that you would need to be able to secure that can be very difficult. You have to weigh that against the level of sophistication and the types of attacks that are happening with this now. In the last 2 years, we've seen some very sophisticated attacks against Exchange. And that's something that I think anybody who's still running Exchange, you do need to take this into account. We saw Proxy Shell and the Hafnium attacks in 2021, both very sophisticated attacks that took advantage of a lot of that privileged service complexity within Exchange to exploit and take advantage of how Exchange worked. Now we saw Proxy Not Shell and this OWA SSRF, that's a mouthful. Those two attacks, again, kind of exploiting a lot of the sophistication and complexity of this. Can somebody run a secure Exchange implementation? Yes, arguably. But are you putting the same level of effort and scrutiny into this as the adversaries are in that case? If not, then you either need to be keeping up with, updating Exchange as quickly as possible, or you run a high risk of, attacks like this occurring. The number of organizations impacted by, those 4 different attacks at this point, it's getting to be a very high risk when you've got nation state level threat actors who are putting focused attention on a specific solution like this. So the guidance that I had put out, and I got to clarify a few things in that patchmanagement.org response, is mitigations are short term. Make sure that you're keeping that into and taking that into account. They aren't guaranteed. That's not a long-term fix. So if a patch comes out and it has performance issues, and my hope is that Rackspace was working with Microsoft to try to get those performance issues resolved so they could have gone off of the mitigation and onto the official patch. Those details aren't available, so I can't read into it any further than that. But running with mitigations after a patch is released, there is an increased risk over time that somebody will be able to bypass those mitigations and take advantage of that. And that's what happened here. The other challenge is when you start to see the level of sophisticated threat actor focus on a solution like this, if there are viable alternatives, you need to strongly consider that. And I know there's organizations with technical reasons why Exchange may still be necessary, but that's definitely something that over the last 2 years and these 4 major attacks, getting such notable focus, that needs to be taken into account. So if you're not already, you should have a kind of reevaluation of if you continue to run on Exchange or not. So that was the guidance that I intended that to kind of focus on. So hopefully that was all clear. I just thought that it was, for those of you who might still be in this situation, getting the clarity on what exactly happened there and the fact that it was a completely new attack chain that was being exploited, not the original one the mitigations were intended for, is good clarity to keep in mind in this particular instance. So that is the first topic. The second one, a little bit more straightforward. We've got the official end of life of Windows 7. So ESU support is now complete for Windows 7. Server 2008 R2 is in the process of it's starting its 4th and final year. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But along with this, you're starting to see other vendors finally dropping support for this. So Chrome updated that they will be sunsetting support for Windows 7, Windows 8, 8.1, Server 2012 R2 in early 2023. So this article is just making sure that you understand that, if you are needing to continue running on any of those platforms for any reason, the Chrome platform will be dropping support for some of these very shortly here as well. The Server 2008, I pulled up the link for 2008 R2. If you look on the lifecycle page, there is an extended support update year 4. It is in Azure only. According to Microsoft's FAQ, that support is free, but you have to use the Azure update services to do it. So you're paying for the 2008 server to be in Azure. That's kind of Microsoft's payment for the continued support for that, but it requires that use of the Azure update service. So it's kind of forcing the updates for that to run, but you do get 1 more year if you choose to go that route. So there's been a few people who have asked questions about that, and I've tried to direct people to the right information, but that is, to my knowledge, the best details about it. Yes, there's year 4, Azure only, and it uses the Azure update services to do that. So there's also some migration guidance and other links in each of these. So the Windows 7, the Server 2008 R2, each of those links have some additional links down there for more information. So you can check those out. Those links are all provided in the presentation today. The Server 2012 and 2012 R2 is coming up in October 2023. So just keep that in mind. All right. Couple of the updates for this month. The first one here is the one known exploited vulnerability that was resolved this month. This was a CVE 2023-21674. Windows Advanced Local Procedure Call, elevation of privilege vulnerability. It affects Windows 8.1 and later, so Windows 10, 11, 2012 R2, 2016, 2019, and Server 2022 are all affected by this vulnerability. It is confirmed to be exploited, so definitely, raises the urgency of the OS updates this month. A couple of key things to keep in mind with this one. This privilege escalation does allow an attacker to do a browser sandbox escape. So that makes this one a little bit more dangerous, is it's able to bypass some security features in there, and the level of privileges that they get if they're able to compromise this is system level. So if they're able to, if they're able to take advantage of this, they do get quite a bit of control over there, and they're able to break out of certain contained experiences that normally another vulnerability might not be able to. The vulnerability is only rated as important by Microsoft's vendor severity rating, so keep that in mind as well as you're looking at this. You need to look at the risk perspective, not just the vendor severity on this one, and make sure that you're addressing this accordingly. So that's the first vulnerability that we're addressing today. The second one, public disclosure. This one, so again, kind of public disclosure, just to make sure we're all on the same level with definitions here. Enough information has been disclosed to the public to give threat actors an advance notice that this is out there. So risk increases on this because they have an opportunity to get ahead of all of us because they knew about this before a fix was officially in place. Whether it will be exploited, time will tell, but statistically these become more risky, especially if they're one that could be rather interesting, which this one does have a few interesting aspects. So this is the Windows SMB Witness Service, elevation of privilege vulnerability. It has a couple of things in the FAQ that you'll want to be aware of. In this case, to exploit the vulnerability, an attacker could execute a specially crafted malicious script which executes an RPC call to an RPC host. So in this case, and you can see this in the CVSS metrics here, they're able to exploit this over the network. The privilege level required to do this is low, so it's not going to be difficult for them to be able to exploit this. The risk here is this is a perfect lateral movement vulnerability. They're going to be able to move from one system to potentially a server with a lot more access by taking advantage of this privilege escalation. So that makes this a little bit more attractive to a threat actor, and again, kind of raises that risk over what action you may want to take around it. Very similar. It's the OS level, Windows 7 all the way up to the latest in this case. Max severity in this case was important as well. So again, depending on your criteria, if you're doing priority deployment based off of critical, in this case, both of these vulnerabilities were rated as important. You need to look at some of those risk aspects as well as you assess what actions you're going to be taking. All right, we've got a few other things to kind of talk through here. The most important one is this advisory 220005. Last month, if you remember, we talked about this advisory. Microsoft had confirmed there were a few signing certificates that were compromised through their partner program. Those were identified, and Microsoft had started focusing on updating block lists to try to prevent any malicious drivers from being pushed out and done so in a way where they were basically trusted in your environment. So Microsoft has included an updated block list in this month's OS updates. Their guidance is to do the OS update this month to make sure that those are plugged. We're not going to go rehash all the details of what's which which drivers are vulnerable or whatever, or what exactly happened there. This is more for the fact that Microsoft has updated that block list, so this month's OS update helps plug the gap on this one. So make sure to get that resolved in your environments, because that, in this case, here's the note that I was looking for. Microsoft is announcing that as of the January 10th, 2023 release, they included the updated block list. Microsoft is strongly recommending that customers install January 10, 2023 updates to ensure that they have the most up-to-date block list in place. Again, the risk here is right now there's drivers floating around that are signed by what should have been a trusted signature, which bypasses the security measures in place. So now that those have been identified and properly blocked, getting this in place will make sure that you're protected. All right. Advisory 20.0011. This one is a few years old. Microsoft, I'm not going to go through, again, all of it here. I want to jump down to what got updated in this case. So in this case, the FAQ was updated to clarify the instructions for determining if customer systems are affected by this vulnerability. So if you remember this vulnerability from before, it is around the security feature bypass in Grub. That's the Grand Unified Boot Loader used by Linux. So there's a number of vendors that were impacted by this, and the references in this article kind of have a link to each one that what would apply there. If you remember having to take action on any systems in your environment there, this is just a heads up. You might want to go take a look at this again just to make sure you've got, everything accurately diagnosed. They have changed a little bit of the details there, but all of the reference links are here. Those of you who had to take action the last time to investigate, this is a cue just to go back and double check. The last advisory that got some updating here was the Microsoft guidance for address spoofing vulnerability in DNS Resolver. And this one, Microsoft updated to say that this is also an issue for Windows Server 2022 and 2022 Server Core. So the same actions that needed to be taken on previous versions, you also need to take there. There are some regedit, configuration changes that you need to make sure you update on 2022 as well. So those are the three advisories and what exactly got updated there. None of those are net new. They're all just, actions from previous. So just make sure to review those if you know that you had to take action on any of them previously. All right. That is it for those. So before I go on, I'm going to check. I know we had a couple of questions about a few of those articles. So Microsoft issuing guidance for Exchange customers regarding proxy nutshell. And so the guidance that I was referring to was in this article specifically. So if you go back to the earlier slide, I've got this link shared in there. This is the mitigation that was provided earlier, and the Microsoft guidance was right here. As of the 11/8/2022 update, Microsoft is saying that the mitigations are no longer recommended. You should be relying on the patch because the patch was a complete fix for all three vulnerabilities. So Jeff, I hope that answers your question there. Yeah, and actually, Todd, it looks like you're responding there. Throw the link in there for him if you would, please. Let's see. Chad asked the question. Appreciate the commentary regarding on-prem Exchange. May need to run through it again for CIO and CEO to get them to move to Microsoft 365. So Chad, on that one, I'm more than happy to. So that guidance, that was more, hey, we're seeing a lot of very sophisticated threat actors. This is not Microsoft guidance. This is Chris Goettl advisement. With what we're seeing, you can bet that this is not going to curb the behaviors of these threat actors. They're very good and very knowledgeable in Exchange. I'd be more than happy to relay that kind of guidance as well. And even before I wrote that commentary up, I had a conversation with our CISO, Daniel Spicer, 2 years ago when Daniel first came into the company. We had this similar conversation, and he said, no, Exchange, it's gone. We're going full Office 365. Even in, at that point, we had only a couple of edge cases, but we had already decided a couple of years ago, had that conversation. The guidance that I wrote up, that is, again, my advisement. Daniel and I reviewed that together, and he did not see any fault in it. That's the same guidance he would be giving in a case like that. So in that case, Chad, I'm more than happy to, give some, some of my opinion on that as well, if that would help. So Russell's question, wouldn't Microsoft's Exchange Online also be vulnerable? In this case, Microsoft applied the patch. So, in the short term, when the patch wasn't in place, Microsoft's Exchange Online technically could have been vulnerable. If they had the mitigation in place, and then later when they put the patch in place, so Microsoft's hosted Exchange Online would not be vulnerable at the time that the Rackspace attack occurred because they put the patch in place. But Russell, I think it is Exchange. They're managing it though, so you've got knowledgeable teams doing that. So is you running Exchange versus using Microsoft's Exchange Online the better route? Microsoft Exchange Online, you have more knowledgeable people, and you've got the responsiveness of, as soon as Microsoft knows about something, they're going to put those changes in place very quickly. They would not have made the decision that Rackspace did in that case. They would have pushed ahead with making sure the patch was in place. That's just how Microsoft does things there. So that would be the difference, I would say, in that case, Russell, is Microsoft Exchange Online would be less risk than running your own Exchange, but still more risk than O365. That's the best I can provide you for kind of guidance around that one. Jesse had a question, wondered of how did they know what method Rackspace chose? I don't think they did. I think it was more of just they were probably probing and found that they could get around it. So in that case, this was more of if you're still running the mitigations, learn from the incident with Rackspace there. Those mitigations will not protect you from the other variant that we've now seen, the other attack chain. All right, I think I've got all of the rest of the questions caught up there. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing, and we'll go ahead and go through the rest of the updates there. I already mentioned this, 2012 R2, end of life is coming. If you have not already budgeted for ESU support, make sure that your conversations are started there, if you know you're going to need to continue running it afterwards. But expect the same 3-year program here as Microsoft did with Server 2008 R2. They do not have a year 4 Azure only option here yet. Might they? Possibly. Now that we've seen that pattern, it could happen again. But that's the date there. October 10, 2023 will be the final Server 2012 and 2012 R2 update. So be prepared for that. Rest of the Windows 10 and 11 lifecycle, we've got 20H2 and 21H2 are the next versions that have dates coming up. That will be in May and June this year. So keep an eye on those dates. If you've got those two branches of Windows 10 floating around, make sure to stay ahead of getting systems updated to a later branch. Content announcements, again, if you're running one of our Ivanti products and you're not already on them, this keeps you up to date on what we'll go through later. We call it the in-between the Patch Tuesdays, but we're releasing content nearly every day of the week, every week. So this is keeping you up to date on those content streams. Many of those are, non-security related, but several of them are security related as well. And we'll recap some of the recent security related ones towards the end of here. But these content notifications give you a notice every time one of our content streams updates. So you subscribe to the ones that mean something to you, and you get to keep up to date on that and know if there's something you may want to take action on. All right, Todd, switching over to you, bulletins and releases.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome to January. New year for new content releases. So let's talk about what came out. Chris had already mentioned that we got the usual update for Adobe Acrobat and Reader. Usually the first one of the year is a pretty big one. And this month they had 15 vulnerabilities, 8 of which were rated critical. There were a number of releases for VC as well as the classic 2020 version. So both of those came out. And you can see the Adobe site for more details on each one of these vulnerabilities, but definitely rated critical. So you want to update as soon as possible on this one. Chris also mentioned that we had a Chrome update on Patch Tuesday, which hasn't happened for quite a while. There was a stable channel update on the 109 version. You'll notice that I put the .xx here because it varies for Windows, Mac, and Linux. I think there's 73, 74, and 75 or something in that range. But you can take a look at the link there that I provided on Google Blob to look for their blog on the actual information on the release. they did address 14 vulnerabilities in this particular update. So again, we rated it critical. They use the term high, so you'll see that in there as well. Getting into the actual Microsoft releases, as Chris mentioned, there were quite a few vulnerabilities addressed this month, 101, of which 3 of those were repeats. In particular, in Windows 11 this month, again, there are 2 versions floating out there, 21H2 and 22H2. They did address 64 vulnerabilities, and as Chris covered earlier, the 21.549 public disclosure is addressed in this particular release, as is the 21.674 known exploitation in both versions of Windows 11 here. No actual new issues reported this month in Windows 11. We've seen this issue on provisioning for quite a while now, actually since the release was actually made for 22H2, as well as this issue around slow copying of files. So they've had these 2 open for a while. There were a couple of other issues last month that they resolved. You might have remembered that there was a SQL connection issue as well as a domain connection issue. Those have all been resolved this month, so we don't carry any of those forward. Thank goodness. Microsoft is actually working on updating some of the known issues. Windows 10, we see 66 vulnerabilities updated, a few more than the Windows 11 version. Again, the same 2 known issues as far as the public disclosure and the known exploited were addressed this month. As with the Windows 11 version, the Windows 10 version had a lot of issues cleaned up this month, so we don't see a lot. The 2019 release, the long-term service channel, still has this cluster update issue. I've talked about it for a long time. Basically, it's kind of self-correcting, though. It's not a bad one in that the services will start up after a few minutes, maybe up to 20 minutes. But if you want to go in and manually start them, you can circumvent this problem quicker. We also have had this problem with Edge for quite a while. Again, this has to do with updating from older versions when you went from the legacy version to the Chrome version. We did see the last release for Server 2008, as Chris mentioned, end of support for this. They did address a large number of vulnerabilities. They've been kind of in the teens the last couple of months, but this month they released updates for 39 vulnerabilities. This particular release, you'll notice that there were no previews. They don't do previews in December usually. So they actually just kind of reference back to the original December release as far as the cumulative update goes. This is the monthly roll-up. You'll notice that neither of those publicly disclosed nor the exploited one are an issue in this particular operating system. They have had this domain joining issue around for a couple of months now. Looks like this probably will not be resolved since it's still being carried forward, and they're closing out support on this. They may do something, obviously, in the Azure version. As Chris said, that is an option for year 4 of support there. But this issue still exists in the operating system. We also saw the security-only updates, of course, for Windows Server 2008. Again, 39 vulnerabilities, the same ones addressed there. Keep in mind that the security-only update addresses just these 39 vulnerabilities. Again, a tactical update month by month, designed to be less impactful on your system if you are concerned about applying the huge monthly roll-up every month. We did get updates, of course, for Windows 7 and Server 2008 R2. Again, the end of the program here. Interesting, this month there were a different number of vulnerabilities addressed in each one. The Windows 7 version actually had 42 addressed, whereas the Server 2008 R2 had 39 vulnerabilities addressed. And again, the 21.549 publicly disclosure was addressed in Windows 7. It is not present in the Server 2008 R2 version. The same issue around the problem with joining domains exists in these older operating systems as well. And of course, we did see the security-only updates for these as well. I did include in all of our slides, we include links to the KB articles. So if you're downloading our slides and reading through these, you can very quickly go to the appropriate KB articles and pull up information about each one of these operating systems each month. We got updates for Server 2012 as well. Few more vulnerabilities addressed here. There were 45 this month. Both of those known issues are shown in red here for the Server 2012. This is the monthly roll-up version. And of course, we had the security-only update for these as well. Again, the same 45 vulnerabilities addressed this month. And as Chris mentioned, 2012 will be going into extended support in October. So, we have about 3/4 of releases here before we go into the ESU support for these systems as well. Monthly roll-up this month for Windows 8.1. I think, as Chris mentioned, 8.1 is actually end of supported here in January as well. Not a lot of people out there using it anymore. I know that for sure. Although the server 2012 will continue with normal support, like I said, until October. But there is a dialog box that pops up in the 8.1 version warning you that end of support is coming this month, and it is now here. They addressed 48 vulnerabilities in this particular update here on the monthly roll-up this month. And of course, we have the security-only release as well for Windows 8.1 and Server 2012 R2. And as I mentioned every month, the reason these two are grouped together, and I just saw Windows 7 and the Server 2008 R2 looped together, is because they have the same basic operating system kernel, and many of the patches apply in a similar fashion across those. We did have a critical update this month for SharePoint Server as well. 3 vulnerabilities addressed. None of these were publicly disclosed or known exploited. I included the list here in case you're wondering what they are. You can go in and take a look at that. They do have implications of remote code execution and security feature bypass. So definitely, they did rate them critical this month. One of those vulnerabilities is rated critical, so definitely should make sure that you get your SharePoint Server updated. We did see releases for Exchange Server. Chris had quite a few comments on Exchange Server there earlier, but we did see updates across all versions. We saw the 2013 CU23, the Exchange 2016 CU23, and the latest 2 supported versions, CU11 and CU12 of 2019. They did address 5 vulnerabilities across all of these different versions of Exchange. It was only rated important this month. Again, none of these vulnerabilities were known, exploited, or publicly disclosed. The largest or the highest problem that they saw with these was spoofing. So we didn't see any remote code execution issues this month. But again, spoofing, elevation of privilege, and information disclosure across these vulnerabilities. We did get our update for Office this month, although it's kind of interesting. The last 2 months, they've only done Office updates for the Mac versions. They haven't done the Windows version. So you'll see that 2019 and 2021 long-term service channel for both versions of Mac were released, as well as some updates for Visio 2013 and 2016. I did list the vulnerabilities down below here. 3 of these were specific to Visio. The first one's there, 21.736, 737, and 741. Again, those are specific to Visio. And the other 2 vulnerabilities were addressed in the Mac updates that were 2023 21.734 and 2023 21.735. Again, those are specific to the Mac releases. But they're all lumped together here under the Microsoft Office update this month. We, of course, got the regular update for the click-to-run versions. These include Office 365, Office 2019, and the Office 2021 long-term service channel. They address 6 vulnerabilities. There's a lot of overlap, obviously, with the regular Office updates that you saw on the last slide. If you want to go in, I include the link here every month. You can go in and dig specifically into the updates that were released for the, again, the click-to-run versions, as we call them. Implications this month are remote code execution and information disclosure across those 6 vulnerabilities. That wraps up the releases this month. It was a pretty smooth Patch Tuesday. It's actually been pretty quiet so far as well on the forums as far as feedback on these updates. We'll see how it goes. Maybe people are just slow to start rolling them out, but we'll see what we see and see what we hear. Chris, with that, back to the Patch Tuesdays.
Todd, before we jump in there were a couple of questions about the Kerberos DC issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any more information about whether that hotfix, that out-of-band fix for the Kerberos issue was included in this month's update?
I'm not sure on that one, Chris. I would have to do a little bit of research.
Okay. So for those there were 2 people who asked a question about that already. We'll check on that, but right now, from what we know, it was not, but unconfirmed. So we'll see if we can find an answer for you here in the next couple of minutes. But while we're doing that, I'll jump into between the Patch Tuesdays, sorry. There were actually a light number of security updates in between the December Patch Tuesday and now, which is not unexpected. As the year wraps up, a lot of organizations are trying to keep only 2 necessary updates. So Foxit Phantom PDF, Foxit PDF Editor, and Thunderbird were the only security updates confirmed with CVEs that we saw in that time frame. There were a number of other updates, as you see there, but those were the ones that were for sure including CVEs. So Phantom PDF, that one included 9 CVEs resolved. That was for Phantom PDF 10, and the PDF Editor 11 is resolving 18 vulnerabilities, and Thunderbird 102.1 resolved 1 CVE in its release. So that was the 3 security-related updates that we saw after December Patch Tuesday. All right, so that is wrapping up most of what we had there. There were a couple of questions. One of the, I hate to say re-release, one of the updated patches that was talked about in the 101 updates that came out this month, a couple of people have already asked about. This is CVE 2022-41099. So this one I do want to touch on real quick because it definitely was one that I saw and wanted to comment on, but I forgot to put the link in there. My apologies on that. So I'm already on the CVE link, but if you go and search for CVE 2022-41099, you'll get to the Microsoft link pretty quickly. In there, if you scroll all the way down to the version information, it's kind of hard to see what they actually changed unless you go all the way down here first. They made the following updates. So first, they added an FAQ with further steps that customers would need to take to protect the Windows recovery environment from the vulnerability that was resolved last year. They also added an FAQ to further clarify that offline images are not affected by this vulnerability. These are informational changes only. So then if you go up to, so the patch, no change to the patch. You don't have to redeploy anything there. But if you go to the FAQ, this is the addition here. Are there additional steps to be protected from this vulnerability? And with that, Microsoft has a link over to this, how to add an update package to Windows RE. In there, the steps are showing you how to run through that process of basically mounting and kicking off that update process to update packages. So you basically have to put in that package path. It shows you how to do this for online and offline. Microsoft says that offline are not affected, but the online definitely are the ones you want to be worried about there. So that was the addition that they put in there, is saying you do need to take this step as well. So hopefully that answered the question there. Let's see, wrapping up other questions. Yeah, Jeff responded back again. As I mentioned, the guidance around mitigations and not putting too much reliance on them, and on Exchange, and the fact that we've got sophisticated threat actors who are outpacing what the average company can dedicate to this. Jeff kind of confirmed that he does also wish that it was Microsoft's guidance, not mine, because that would make it a lot easier. But yeah, can't help there. Microsoft, the fact that they've got an Exchange online service, there's money involved. So they are not going to make a concrete type of guidance like that. But if you look at the evidence we've seen, we've had 2 years back to back with some pretty devastating targeted attacks on Exchange as a platform. There's multiple sophisticated threat actor groups that know that platform well. You can expect that behavior is going to continue. So again, it's one of those where I tend to lean towards the much more, direct kind of like, hey, when is it right to move off? Well, the risk doesn't take much for me to say we really need to start, considering that type of a move to something more secure. It's just a matter of I'm seeing patterns that most people are not looking at on a regular basis, just because of the nature of, Todd and I do this type of analysis every month, and we're, looking for, patterns like this a lot of times. So with this information, Jeff, hopefully you get a little bit more leverage behind that to be able to try to convince your organization that it might be time as well. But yeah, that's one of the reasons why I try to provide this type of guidance, is giving people like yourselves the tools you need to be able to go back and say, Microsoft isn't saying this, but it's because they got money involved. But look at the patterns and look at what other people in the industry are saying. that's trying to give you guys a little bit more weight behind that to push decisions to a place where it's a little bit more risk adverse, I guess. So Kyle had a question. Does this monthly webinar provide CPEs? No, we don't, unfortunately, Kyle. So yeah, have not registered for and can't provide those. Apologize for that. Let's see, Todd, do we have anything else? I think we got to all the other questions there.
Yeah, I'm looking through the KVs here to see if anything is specifically called out on the Kerberos updates, but I don't see anything specifically called out actually in the bulletins themselves, Chris.
Got it. Yeah, so from what we're seeing, it does not look like that's been included yet, the Kerberos out-of-band fix. So,
yeah, the main security things they're calling out in most of these is an update to the local session manager. That's one issue. The issue they had last month with the ODBC SQL Server driver, they're calling out that specifically. And other than that, that's pretty much it. That's as far as the big call-outs, as far as protocol changes.
Yeah. The CVE for the November 2022 vulnerability. Again, Michael, I'm guessing you're talking about the Exchange CVE, or are you talking about one that we talked about a lot of November CVEs? I apologize. Maybe ping me with which vulnerability you were asking about. Was it the Exchange one, or was it one of the other re-releases? Might have been the Windows RE update from November, and if that's the case, that would be this one. All right, so Michael, hopefully that is the one you're looking for. Oh yeah, you did respond back saying the one for WinImage, so that should be the right one. Not a problem. You're welcome. And the ODBC issue, has the ODBC issue been resolved from December?
Yes.
Todd?
Yeah, that was corrected.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so Elgin, I think our stance on the Kerberos out-of-band patches, we don't see anything confirming or denying if that Kerberos out-of-band patch was included. So I think we got to most of them.
Yeah, I don't see anything else right now.
Yeah, we got a more of a statement from Jesse. He's saying that they've been having some KVM and VirtIO driver issues when it comes to some of the Windows updates that load in a preload state. It's causing VMs to hang for them. So that's probably more of just a general heads up for those of you running KVM and VirtIO. So if you are running those, check for that type of challenge as well. So thank you, Jesse, for that. All right. So yeah, I don't think we have any more on the Kerberos issue than that. We haven't seen anything to confirm or disqualify whether that's been added in there. So unfortunately, not much more to add on that one. And that seems to be most of what we have left for questions. CVE 2023-21674 does not require immediate patching. Let me check that one real quick just to make sure I know what we're talking about. 2023-21674. Oh, come on. It didn't get another hyphen in there. Windows Advanced Local Procedure Call, elevation of privilege vulnerability. So that was the vulnerability that was confirmed exploited right now. it's so to cases like this, you have to decide kind of your organization, risk-wise. They didn't give us a lot of detail of, how widespread were the attacks, how, what type of verticals are they targeting. What we know right now is it's confirmed to be exploited by threat actors in the wild. So in that case, they've had this in hand for some time. How widely available this is to other threat actors is unknown based on the information we've got. So I would say, Spendana, the guidance I would give is you want to try to resolve a vulnerability like this within 14 days or less. The longer you wait, the higher the risk that this gets out into more mainstream. So if you look at, and I think this was already added to the CISA KEV list. So those of you familiar with that, that's where they provide guidance on a specific CVE. And actually, we can even check that. You can go out to their database and pull this one CVE up and see if it's in there. But they just did an update of one more CVE as of yesterday. I'm pretty sure this was the one. I didn't even go and look yet because I was fairly confident that that was going to be the one added. Their guidance is probably going to be within 2 weeks that you need, organizations under CISA's umbrella need to have this in place. I would reflect similar guidance. The sooner the better in a case like this, because we know it's out in the hand of threat actors already. So that would be the best guidance I can give. I can't give guidance of you should stop everything and do this right now. That's just not the type of general guidance that we can give, just because every organization is a little bit different. But if you can do end user machines quickly, that would definitely be a serious kind of reduction in risk real quick. But after that, because of the browser sandbox escape, end user machines are a very easy way to get in, use this, break out of the sandbox, get the right level of privileges to start taking over a system, and then start looking for ways to move laterally. So with that, I would say if you can do end user systems within the next week or so, that'd be ideal. And full environment within 14 days, again, ideal. But that's the best guidance I can give there without knowing your specific organization and situation. So hopefully that helps. All right. On that, thank you, everyone. Do appreciate everybody jumping on and sticking around with us with some very good questions there. We'll look at the questions in text there and respond to a few more. But thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we will see you next month.
See ya. Thanks, everybody.